Well, hello everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be the first in a series of broadcasts about the world of archives and records management. I'm John Pelan. I'm the director of the Scottish Council on Archives. We're a small advocacy and development body for the archives and records management sector in Scotland. And today I'm delighted to welcome Laura Millar. Laura is known to many people in the archive community and beyond. She's an independent consultant in archives, records, and information management. She lives in Canada, on the West Coast. She was named the winner of the Society of American Archivists 2011 Waldo Gifford Leland Award for Archives Principles and Practices. And recently, in 2019, she's published another book called A Matter of Facts, The Value of Evidence in an Information Age. And I'm going to be asking Laura about the book, which is an absolutely fascinating read and could not be more important and relevant than today. The book is described in some of the various blurbs. It's a book about the safeguarding of authentic facts in this disruptive Orwellian age where digital technologies have opened the door to a post-truth world in which alternative facts can be so easily accepted as valid. And because facts matter, evidence matters. And in a review of the book, Lee McIntyre said that like Orwell and Bradbury, like Stanley and Siskin, Laura Millar has written a book that people in the future will look back on and say, this is one of the books that helped us to survive until the new era. Well, wow, Laura, that's quite a statement.
Thank you, John. It is.
So we'll be looking to you and to archivists and to do everything that you do to get us out of this current crisis. And I really want to kick off this discussion today with reference to a statement that was released yesterday by the International Council on Archives on the current COVID-19 crisis. And the statement begins with, the duty to document does not cease in a crisis, it becomes more essential. And I just wondered, perhaps you'd like to reflect on that, Laura, and how important do you think that statement is?
Thank you, John. It's lovely to chat with you. And I'll just start by saying I'm sorry we aren't doing this in person because, you know, I was supposed to be with you in Scotland right now as we speak.
I'm sorry. I should have said that. Laura was going to be our annual lecture in Edinburgh in March, but unfortunately a little virus outbreak has postponed that. But yeah, anyway, carry on, Laura.
Well, and here we are. And interestingly and ironically, in light of the question you ask, after our visit together in Edinburgh, I was to be walking and drinking whiskey with Anthea Sellis in the Scottish Hills. And Anthea is the Secretary General of the International Council on Archives and a good friend of mine. So for various conflict of interest reasons, I have nothing negative to say about this statement or about the work of the ICA. I am on the program commission of ICA, and I'm a big supporter of the organization. And I had nothing to do with this statement, but I support it completely. I think the tremendous value is that it is not focusing on the value of archives for history, for the future, for posterity. It's saying actions have to be taken now. Decisions have to be documented now for accountability. They need to be documented. The records and data needs to be secured and preserved and made available. And this is both digital and physical analog paper records. This statement builds on the UNESCO statement that came out a couple of days ago that talks about the importance of documentary heritage and memory institutions. And that statement is extremely valuable, but it is more wide encompassing. It addresses libraries, museums, cultural institutions. This statement, which is the ICA in partnership or supported by a number of other organizations, the Digital Preservation Coalition, UNESCO, ARMA, this statement says we have to act now for today. Accountability is critical. And what we're facing right now is a critical need for statistics. How many people have died? How many people have the virus? We're in this COVID-19 world. But behind every number is a piece of evidence, is a fact, is a person, is a hospital, is a test result. So we have to capture all of that core evidence, or else we can't trust the statistics and we can't trust the numbers. And one of the things we're finding is that we have varying levels of clarity about what's actually going on right now around the world in terms of the infection rates, in terms of the death rates, because everybody's counting everything differently. So what we need is to go back and say, no matter how you count it today, we need to go back to the evidence. This statement says we have to capture it, we have duty to document, and we have to preserve it. I think that's vital.
And you yourself wrote in a blog, I think just at the end of last week, you wrote, if we want to stop the spread of COVID-19, and we all want that as soon as possible, then we must capture not just the statistics, but the proof. And I guess what you're saying is that only through recording and the evidence can we demonstrate the proof that will save lives in the future.
That's right. Recording the facts. A fact is somebody is sick. The evidence is the written or documented confirmation that that person is sick and that person has, for example, the COVID-19, has the coronavirus. So we have to capture that and not throw it away because, well, we've got the numbers. A lot of people say, why do we need records? We've got the history book. Well, this is the same thing right now. Why do we need the numbers? Why do we need the facts? We've got the statistics. Well, we're going to go back and review those statistics over and over and over again. And policy is going to be driven by that. But we're going to have to go back and say, is this accurate? How is it counted? What does it mean? So we absolutely need the proof. We need the evidence.
But I think, as you also pointed out in your blog, it's not just about statistics and proof and the science. It's also about remembering the people behind the numbers. And I just wondered, why do you think it's so important to remember people, and how can archives and records help us do that?
Well, we are realizing, I think, our humanity in this. Our provincial health officer in British Columbia, who is now a local hero, Dr. Bonnie Henry, at the end of every daily conference, she says, remember, be kind. And what she's saying is that we are connected. We are together in this. We are fighting something we can't see. And we want to be remembered at the best of times. We all want to be remembered and remembered well. But we need to be remembered honestly. And this has kind of driven everybody back to their archives and back to their families and back to their records and saying, I need to have touchstones. I need to have something that connects me. So we don't just need the numbers. We need the faces and the names and the people. And the archives is what gives us that, and has ever since we started capturing evidence in a literate form. And now we're increasingly working in a visual world. But when we started capturing records that were interpreted by language of some sort, this is how we capture information and share it. So we won't remember us if we don't capture the evidence. We're creating masses of it. And I just want to make sure we capture the good stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm experiencing is, although now more than ever we need to depend on robust science and robust analysis of data, there seems to be a lot of evidence floating around from different sources, and some of it, or much of it, in fact, is conflicting. And you yourself have written about this, the daily statistical mill of shocking statistics and frightening graphs. And are we in danger of being overwhelmed by this evidence? Or is there a path through that the record keeper can help with?
It's an excellent question. I would say I'm not sure if we're being overwhelmed by the evidence, or that it's conflicting. We're being overwhelmed by it. But is the evidence conflicting, or is our interpretation of the evidence conflicting? I think, for example, if somebody said there have been as many as 100,000 deaths, that's an interpretation of evidence. What if somebody said there have only been 100,000 deaths? That's a completely different interpretation of the evidence. We are being overwhelmed by evidence because so much is going on right now. At the moment, we're going to have to keep more and more and more of it, because we can't say, well, your death is worth recording or your illness is not worth recording. We need to keep going back to the facts and the proof, and look beyond the interpretations and say, maybe I need to look at how this is interpreted differently. So how do we know what to believe? That's a matter of trust. Who are the trustworthy agents that are capturing and sharing this? And so we have to look to who is talking to us. This is where the news media becomes so important. Do we have trustworthy newsmakers? And there's a lot of talk now about fake news, but that does not mean inaccurate or inauthentic. It maybe perhaps means I don't like what's being said.
Yeah, in your book, A Matter of Facts, you quote Lee McIntyre, who talks about deference to evidence being so important, and you write about an evidence crisis, and I wondered, could you back that up? What's caused this? Is it the move to, from analog physical material to digital, or realization that, as we see happening, from the news on a daily basis, that data can be manipulated and used for political or commercial motives? What is that evidence crisis that you talk about?
It's a fascinating question, and it is what I struggled with as I was researching and writing my book. So I did a lot of reading well outside the world of archives. And of course, I live in a North American environment. I live on the longest undefended border in the world, next to the biggest elephant in the world. So a lot of the focus here is on what's going on in the United States. But the evidence crisis is really a crisis of trust. We have a breakdown of trust in society. We don't believe the experts. We don't believe in science. We don't believe in facts. And the question then is, why is that? The archivist is the person who tries to help capture and preserve the evidence. It is not our job to decide if we like it or not like it. Our job is to capture it. But beyond our scope, although we need to support it very much, beyond our scope is making sure that people use that evidence in a trustworthy way, or realize that it's there. Kurt Anderson is an American journalist who wrote a book called Fantasyland: How America Went Haywire. And he goes all the way back to the arrival of the Puritans on the East Coast in the 1600s and said everything started going wrong because people did not believe in facts. And he's not writing about archives at all. I would love to sit down with him over a cup of tea and say, let me show you how my thoughts and your thoughts merge. But it's not just the move to digital. It was happening well before that, with the breakdown of education systems, with the breakdown of respect for expertise, for science. Finan O'Toole has written a book, The Politics of Pain, where he talks about nationalism in the UK and the rise of Brexit. And this is also a case of a more interest in mythology and fantasy than in reality and facts. So archives are not the center of this issue, but we are what can take us out of this as long as we protect them. And the challenge is people don't even believe that what we are keeping is worth keeping. Not everybody, but a lot of people, because it contradicts their belief system, which is not one that is based on facts for many people. So the crisis is a trust crisis, and it's being defined in our world as an evidence crisis.
In my organization, we talk a lot about the importance of archives and archivists in terms of the wider benefit to society and their impact, in the sense that archives tell us who we are. They tell us our stories. And without archives, we don't have a past. So it seems to me that archivists, they're very much gatekeepers of information and of the national documented memory of any country. But on the other hand, a lot of people don't know what archivists do. They have a very misguided idea about archivists. And I just wondered, do you think archivists should be ultimately responsible for these decisions on what to keep, what is authentic, what is important, or is there is this something that should be in the hands of perhaps politicians or cultural leaders? In your own book, you've talked about how the archivist's role has changed, from your early days of helping elderly volunteers with their historical records to now where you're advising on digital preservation and digitizing, and it seems that it's a very wide scope, in terms of the remit and the role of the archivist. So what, archivists, we both agree, are important, but should someone else be making these decisions, and if so, who?
It's an excellent and very challenging question, and I struggle because my answer has me falling down on both sides of a fence, which is a very Canadian thing to do. We like to sit in the middle and say, well, it could be this, and it could be this, and it could be this. Very non-committal of us. But I think archivists have been gatekeepers. I prefer now to think of us as stewards, and we are also expert advisors. In a paper world, it was possible for somebody to shove a box of records in a closet and for them not to get found for decades, and the archivist to swoop in and take them away. And we would go and hunt, and we would capture, and we would find these things and keep them. And in some ways, if we hadn't done that, it wouldn't have happened. So we were activists well before the word activist came in. And we kept what we wanted. We kept what was available, what had survived, but then we would decide for ourselves, because nobody else was making the decisions, that this is what we want. I'm not sure that that was the best way to go 200, 300, 400 years ago, but it is what it is. It was what it was. The challenge now is that we can't swoop in. I can't swoop into your computer and say, I have decided that this is what's worth keeping, and I'm going to keep it. So we have to change what we do. This is the paradigm shift. It is, our role is going to change. Whether we did it right before or wrong before, it's going to change, because we cannot intervene early enough in the records creation, record keeping process, without working directly with someone else. So we can't stand by and keep the old stuff. We have to be participants in the management of the new. And the challenge there, what is our role, goes back to this question of trust. Are we trustworthy in the advice we give? Are we being led by the biases or prejudices that we all carry about that I think this is important, I think that is not important? So I think ultimately, to get to your question and a possible answer, the decision about what to keep should not be ours, or should not be ours alone. We should advise, we should guide, and we should say, I believe for all this analysis, I'm the expert, I give you this analysis, that this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to keep. And then we have to hope that those people who have asked us our opinion listen to our opinion. Now, there are two areas where that happens. One is in the public sector, the bureaucratic sector, where our decisions can then be bound in some sort of legislation or guidance that says, we're the expert, we've given this opinion, and we're going to make the government create these records and keep these records, which goes back to the ICA statement of the duty to document, that governments have to come in and say, in this time, we as agencies of power are going to commit to creating these records. And the archivists are the ones who say, here's what you should make and here's what you don't make. In the personal realm, we are more like personal trainers. I can't make a person do their sit-ups, but I can tell them they should do their sit-ups, and I can tell them why it's important to do it, but I can't make them do it. And as an archivist, I can't make you keep your family photographs and name the people in your family albums if you don't want to. What I want, and what I tried to do in the book, is paint a picture of why this is so valuable, and maybe get people to feel differently about it so that they want to. And then if they want to, they call us as the archivists and say, how can you help me get through this? Then we help them get through this. I don't know what will happen now in the digital age, if we will actually get caches of records coming to us that we can actually open 10 or 15 years from now, like the boxes in the cupboard. So we need to be these trainers, which is not what we used to do.
It seems to me that decision process that was, something that archivists were trained to do, in terms of deciding what was important and what should be kept, and what was something that people should look at and might look at in the future. It's kind of very much about looking at information and records as an asset, and there's a lot of talk now about information assets. There's the bandied about phrase, data is the new oil. And you write in your book that in the current post-truth world, we're drowning in data. And I wondered, is that part of the problem now in terms of knowing what's real, what is evidence-based, what's authentic, what should be kept? There's just so much data now, and it's flowing so fast through so many different media, whether it's social media or emails, or everything is becoming digital, it's just impossible to keep hold of it.
That's a fascinating and challenging issue. I don't know that I agree with the phrase that data is the new oil. As I was trolling my social media this morning, I saw a reference to information being the new water or the new electricity. And I think that's more to the point. To say data is the new oil commodifies it. It says there's a market-driven aspect to it, and there absolutely is. People want to own data, and the control of data is one of the challenges with managing it for accountability and for social responsibility. For example, as a parenthetical, when I consult, I am often asked, how can we make money selling our old photographs? And I have learned how to keep my face straight and say, that is not where you're going to make your money. And you're not going to make money out of archives in that sense. So that's not what they exist for, in my opinion. But to say data or evidence or records or archives is the new water, it is a public resource in many ways. And one of the challenges is we need to ensure that the data people need to protect themselves and to know who they are and where they came from is easily and readily available without huge barriers. We're finding now, for example, that Wi-Fi connections are critically important. How do we do home learning and online learning if we don't have Wi-Fi? How do we do it if we don't have the resources on our laptops? So we're drowning in data, and we need to get rid of what we don't need. But we absolutely need to protect and make available what we do need so that it's authentic and reliable. And that, I don't think, is a matter of market forces. That is a matter of rights and responsibilities in society.
You say it's responsibility of society, but you also in your book talk about the trustworthiness of evidence endangered when sources are taken out of their original context. And it seems to me that because data can be manipulated, it can also, in the wrong hands, be dangerous. And does the archivist have a role in trying to steer the misuse of data away from the wrong hands?
I think the archivist's first role is to protect the authentic evidence, the first record, the first piece of proof, so that it is always there. And then the next step is to encourage that it is used appropriately. Appropriately meaning it is used so that its authenticity is respected. So when we have, for example, all these, New York City is recording all these deaths, and they've changed their numbers of virus-related deaths because they weren't counting deaths at home. They were counting deaths in hospitals. Now they're starting to count deaths in home. The archivist is the one who has those records. The hospitals are creating them. The coroner's office is creating them. We need to make sure that the form that is used to fill out, whether it's physical or digital, is accurate and complete. Another example, in Canada, there is a lot of talk now about capturing race and ethnicity and gender in a lot of the COVID-19 related records. In Canada, this is something we do not like, because we say we are all equal and we're not going to capture this. And now the question is, we need to capture this because it is what's going to tell us whether certain people in society are more or less affected by this. So the archivist needs to keep the record and the evidence of what the metadata was in that record, how it was created, where it was kept. Then, if it gets in the wrong hands, well, that's an interpretive question. And we can't protect it from that, from being misused and interpreted. We can protect it from being lost. And that's the biggest risk we have, is as long as it is there and authentic and reliable, then if you want to go off and use it for some nefarious purpose, somebody needs to stop you. And if we can help with that, we will. But we still need to have that record as an authentic record. So a record in the wrong hands is dangerous, as long as it's not actually in their hands and nobody else's, and we can go back to it and say, you have misused this, and I'm going to show you that you have misused this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make. I wonder, at the moment, politicians in particular, seem to be playing fast and loose with evidence. We have Trump administration talking about alternative facts. And I'm always reminded about British comedian Vic Greaves, who once said that 88.2% of statistics were made up on the spot.
I love it.
And I wondered, it seems to me that by spreading or sowing discord and misinformation, by misusing and abusing facts and creating alternative realities, it's dangerous, but it's also deliberate. And I wonder, do you think that's a growing trend, or is it something that's always happened? We've always had propaganda, or in the state of North of America, is it likely to be only as long lived as the current president?
Would that it were so. I fear not, my friend. I fear not. It's a challenge. I have reached the ripe old age of 60. I have said to a few people that I feel that I'm being punished personally for not following my mother's advice to sit down and watch the Watergate hearings when I was a teenager. And I actually was living in the United States at the time. I feel like all that was going wrong in the 1970s is coming back to bite in the North American context, but possibly also in the UK and in other parts of the world. There was a trend in the 50s and 60s and 70s of deregulation, of fracturing of societies, of more emphasis on the individual, less emphasis on the collective. And I sit in a unique position, having grown up in the United States. I'm an American-born child of Canadian parents, grew up in the United States, moved to Canada, lived in England for quite a few years. I've seen these various cultures. I think this was happening well before Trump was elected. He is a symptom. He is not the cause. His end of term will not result in a change. The change is going to come from a renewed respect for democracy, which involves respect for education and human rights and personal responsibility. I made a statement once about the Me Too movement, and I said the danger with the Me Too movement is that it's being taken over by a Me First movement. And that's where we have our conflict, and our political leaders who are not respecting all of the people in society equally are just a symptom of that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think people need to realize, as you suggest, that what's happening now is just something that has been going on for quite some time, but it seems to have come to a head. And the difficulty that I think most people have is knowing, where do we go next? Can it get worse, or can it level out, or can it get better? Coming back to you as an archivist, you live in a world, hopefully, of objectivity, or you're searching for it, of evidence, of authenticity. I'm a philosophy graduate, so I'm trained to be skeptical about most statements. But it seems that lots of people now readily accept sometimes quite outlandish claims from politicians and from journalists, without any evidence to back it up. And I just wondered why, in the free world, are more people not shouting, "Where's the evidence?" when someone, whether it's Donald Trump or Boris Johnson or whoever, makes an outlandish statement that obviously they could not back up because the evidence doesn't exist. Is it simply that people want to believe in something, therefore they're not going to challenge it?
I think that's part of it. I think we are in silos. We are driven as much by our biases as anything else. Partly, perhaps, it's a weakening of the education system, a weakening of our sense of responsibility for reading and interpreting with caution, critical thinking. When I was young, I was a little social butterfly, and my father packed me up and threw me into a girls' school and said, "You're going to do homework 8 hours a day, whether you like it or not." And what I learned there was critical thinking skills. I'm not sure I would have learned them in the public school system that I had been in the particular place I was living. I don't think children today are getting those critical thinking skills. So the question, where is the evidence? People need to understand that there is evidence, that it's not just your Facebook feed, that there is a truth out there. We need to get past the clickbait and open up the article and not just look at the headline. I am reminded of a very dear friend who is a Facebook fiend who said to me that she was appalled because the hotel in Ottawa, an iconic hotel in our nation's capital, was going to build an addition that looked like a big square box. And she said, "This is horrible. Look at that. They've built this horrible square box." And she showed me the picture on Facebook. And I said, "Well, it's not built." And she says, "Well, it's there. It's there. It's right there." And I said, "No, it's not built. That is an architectural rendering." And the problem is the architectural rendering was so realistic, it looked real. So our digital technologies are showing us things that look real, like deep fake videos. But we have to be so much more critical when we look at this and say, is this real? What's behind this? And we need to be teaching young children this. We need to be working very hard on this. And we don't have a sympathetic environment for that because we have social media, which is siloed. And that's where we go. And we don't go to the newspapers behind that. And we don't go to the journalism that is the resource we need right now for the immediate history, and the history books that are going to be our longer term analysis, critical analysis of what's happened.
Well, it seems that if you strip away the political statements, if you take away the journalism, you don't go on social media, the only thing that's left, the spine of truth and authenticity, is the record, and that surely is a point from which maybe people should start. And I really like your idea of teaching critical thinking at a young age. I think that's really, really important. You write in your book, we started this conversation where you talked about how at one point archivists were the gatekeepers, but now, particularly in the digital world, there's a huge personal, social, and probably even corporate responsibility to record our own individual archives, our own individual memories and records. On a personal level, when my father died in 2011, I took possession of the family photographs in suitcases and shoeboxes, and they date back to the late 1800s. I'm thinking in not too distant future, generations just won't have that. They won't have the mobile phones or the hard disk drives, and evidence, as you say in your book, faces a precarious future and it is under attack. So therefore, we're all record keepers, and we all should be. But how realistic is that? How realistically can we get people to take more responsibility for their own data, for their own digital photographs, for their own, correspondence or emails, or things that are important, maybe not to wider society, but will be important to their families in the future?
I think it is as hard as everything else we do in life. And I go back to my analogy of the personal trainer. Nutritionists and exercise gurus say, we should all be out going for 20-mile walks and hikes, and we should be only eating yogurt. I love yogurt, but, enough is enough. We are not alone as archivists in trying to get people to do something that we think is important. and we think is important because it's what we're interested in, but also because we see it as a value to society. Nutritionists see healthy people who don't have heart disease as a benefit to themselves and a benefit to society. It's difficult. It's extremely difficult, but so is everything in life, and we just have to keep fighting the fight, although I don't like the idea of it being a fight. We need to keep sharing the idea that records and evidence is valuable. One of the reasons I wrote the book was I was tired of sitting in corporate meeting rooms arguing for the value of records to people who didn't get it. I thought I need to find some way of communicating this to the public and maybe getting them to see that this is useful. Just like somebody needs to argue that, yes, getting exercise is useful, eating well is useful, keeping your house free of bugs is useful. It's just as much as we can do as human beings to try to be the best we can be. And as archivists and records managers, we may still have to step in and rescue materials. But how much nicer it will be if that happens less and less. And if when we talk to people, they say, yes, I understand. One of the joys I've had with the book and with the blog post that you mentioned that came out last week is just the little reaction for people saying, I didn't think about that before. And now I'm going to go clean my attic, or now I'm going to go organize 5 photographs, or I'm going to identify my grandparents because I know who they are. If that's as far as we get, that's great because it's cumulative. If parents do that, their children do that, their grandchildren do that, we turn the corner. We get people to care. I truly believe people do care. They just don't know how to start, and they don't know what to do. And all they need to do is say, well, identify who's in a photograph in your album. That's a great start. And then they say, I'm not supposed to write on it in pen. And I think, well, that is a much lesser sin, my friend, than not knowing who that person is.
Okay, well, I think that's a really positive message. I mean, it's a realistic one, and I think it comes down to, something that's really important is that archives and the exploration of archives, that journey of discovery that people go on, it's a joyful experience, and it's something that can make people feel happy. People love to connect with people in the past, and it's not just about statistics, it's not just about evidence and authenticity, it's fundamentally about the human story. And I think that the work of archivists needs to be explained more to people. When I say maybe not explained is the wrong word, it needs to be celebrated more. I think that the role of the archivist in society is incredibly important. It's something that needs to be, as I say, celebrated as much as possible.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I just share this story that happened to me a few months ago, which I think is such a good news story. I got an email from a woman in Edmonton, the neighboring province, which is where my father grew up. And she said, I think you're related to Minnie Miller. And I said, yes, I am. She was my great-grandmother. And she said, well, I think I live in your family's house, but I'm not sure. And she sent me some details, and she said, can you help with this? And she had the number, the number of the house, 1584 29th Street, I think, whatever. And I looked in my father's photo album, and there was a picture of my father leaning against the front rail of a house with exactly the same house number on it. And in Edmonton, and I sent her that picture, and I said, that's my family's house, and that's my dad when he was 4 years old. And she said, I had no idea archives could give me so much information about where I lived. And I said, I had no idea that you would help me confirm that that was the house that my father lived in. And she's now a great advocate of archives. The house is getting a heritage plaque because my great-grandmother was apparently a long-standing and noted citizen in the community. In that particular area, she ran a rooming house and looked after lots of boarders at the time. And this is somebody whose world, the woman who contacted me, her world is completely outside of the world of archives, but she engaged with it, and I helped her engage with it. And she helped me engage with Edmonton, which is a place I have never lived in, but a place that my father called home. And I see that power of archives, one person to one person, one family to one community, to one historical society, as just a wonderful, it's the joy of archives to me. I help governments organize their records, and I'm glad to do it, but I love it when I see people get excited about their family photographs.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to end this chat, Laura, the joy of archives. It's been fascinating talking to you. I very much hope that you can come to Scotland in the not too distant future. I can recommend to everyone your book, A Matter of Facts. It's a bit scary, but it does end in a positive note, as I hope we have done today. So thank you again, Laura.
Thank you very much, and I hope it's funny as well as scary. Thank you for your time, John.